A pack could forgive weakness faster than it forgave a woman who refused to be owned. Guinevere had learned that truth, the way wolves learned winter, not from stories, but from hunger in the bones and cold that settled behind the ribs. In every hall she had crossed, worth had been measured by obedience, by lineage, by who spoke for you when the room turned cruel. Love was praised as sacred until power felt threatened. Then vows became chains, and chains were renamed law. She had stopped expecting kindness. She had not stopped needing shelter. By the time she reached Ravencrest, dusk had already swallowed the mountain pass, and the rebuilt stronghold rose from black stone like a scar that refused to close. New beams still smelled of cut pine. Fresh mortar lined old walls cracked by war. Torches burned at the gate, their smoke sharp with resin, and she tasted ash before anyone spoke to her. The guard who took her name did not hide his stare when his gaze dropped to her belly. "State your business." "Sanctuary," she said, voice hoarse from 2 days without proper sleep. "Temporary. I can work for rations. I can mend, haul, clean. I just need walls for the night." He looked at the crest stitched onto her torn sleeve, the faded silver star of Starfall territory, and his mouth hardened. "You came from them. I left them. That is not the same thing." No, it wasn't. Leaving was choice. Being hunted was consequence. She was taken inside anyway, not as guest but as problem, escorted through corridors crowded with servants carrying garlands, polished silver, ceremonial bowls of moon oil. Ravencrest was preparing for a political mating that would bind 3 border alliances before first snow. Everyone moved with urgency. Everyone looked at her as if misfortune had walked in wearing a human face. A steward named Marta shoved a rough gray dress into her arms. "Change. Kitchen level. You carry torches in the hall tonight. Then scrub whatever nobles spill. Do not speak unless addressed." Guinevere touched the fabric. Coarse. Unlined. Servant gray. The color used to erase identity without saying the word. "I asked for sanctuary, not spectacle." Marta's expression did not soften. "You arrived on treaty night. Spectacle is all there is." In the lower corridor, 2 young she-wolves sorting linens went quiet as she passed. One whispered, not softly enough, "That's her. Lucian's former bond. The traitor." The other answered, "I heard the child isn't even wolf blood." Guinevere kept walking. She had practiced stillness until it felt like armor. Keep the spine straight, keep breathing. Do not give strangers the shape of your hurt. Near the preparation chamber, she stopped dead. Her mother's dress hung from a bronze rack beneath lamplight, moon thread embroidery glimmering across ivory silk. Guinevere knew every seam because she had stitched half of them at 14, pricking her fingers while her mother laughed and said, "One day you will stand in this and be seen by someone worthy." The sleeves tapered into delicate knotwork patterns from an old thornwood line. Even the tiny repair at the hem, hidden under a fold, was hers. Her hands went numb. "Where did you get that?" A woman stepped from behind the screen, tall and flawless, dark curls braided with silver wire, chin lifted in practiced grace. Celine Voss, daughter of a trade elder, the kind of she-wolf who never entered a room without calculating who might be useful by the time she left it. She ran her fingers over the bodice as if stroking a prize hound. "It was in a donation chest," Selene said. "Unclaimed property. It was stolen from my trunk." Selene smiled without warmth. "Then perhaps you should have guarded your trunk." Marta appeared in the doorway and saw where Guinevere was looking. "Enough. Selene is the ceremonial bride tonight." Guinevere laughed once, the sound jagged and small. "Ceremonial, in my mother's right dress." "In a dress fit for the role," Marta corrected. "You will carry Isle fire. Consider it mercy you are inside at all." The room tilted. For a heartbeat, she thought she would faint and was furious with herself for it. She pressed her palm to the wall until the stone steadied her. Across from her, Selene stepped into the gown and turned so a maid could lace the back. "Try not to drip on the floor," Selene said lightly, eyes sliding to Guinevere's stomach. "Some of us are here to build alliances, not scandals." When the great hall opened, drums rolled once, then fell silent. Wolves of 7 territories filled the tiered benches. Banner cloth snapped above them in cross-currents from the high vents. Snowmelt wind slipped through carved slits in the stone, and the torch Guinevere held shook despite both hands gripping the iron shaft. At the far end of the aisle stood the moon altar, ringed by white candles and salt. Selene waited there in ivory, chin bowed just enough to signal humility without surrender. Elders watched from raised seats. Visiting alphas murmured behind gloved knuckles. Everything was arranged to display order. Then Victor Ravencrest entered. He moved like a blade drawn slowly from a sheath, controlled and deadly even in stillness. Black ceremonial coat. Fur at the shoulders. Forearms bare where ancient runes tracked from wrist to elbow in dark lines that seemed to shift in torchlight. He was larger than rumor and quieter, which somehow felt more dangerous. His face gave nothing away as he descended the first steps toward the altar. Guinevere lowered her gaze and counted breaths. 1 to survive the stairs, 2 to quiet the ache in her lower back, 3 to ignore the child pressing low and restless beneath her apron ties. Midway down the aisle, Victor stopped. His head turned, slow and absolute, not toward Selene in stolen silk, but toward the left torch line where Guinevere stood with soot on her knuckles and sweat cooling at the base of her neck. His nostrils flared. The change in him was instant and terrifying. His pupils narrowed, amber deepening toward molten metal, and the runes on his arms lit in branching veins of gold. A murmur rippled through the hall. Selene lifted her head, confusion cracking her perfect composure. "My alpha?" Victor did not look at her. He took one step, then another, past the altar, past the waiting elder, straight toward the servant line. Guinevere's pulse pounded so hard she heard it in her ears. Heat pulsed beneath her skin, climbing her spine in a wave that made her knees threaten to give. A silver crackle prickled along her nerves, sharp as winter static, and for the first time in months, the numb place inside her chest fractured open. No, not now. Not in front of them. She took half a step back. The torch scraped stone. Victor stopped an arm's length away, breathing ragged, gaze fixed on her as if the rest of the hall had fallen away. "Guinevere," he said, and her name sounded like recognition and oath in the same breath. The room did what cruel rooms always did when power shifted. It watched for collapse. 3 nights earlier, collapse had nearly killed her. Starfall's moon court had convened in the old granary because Lucian wanted witnesses, and the granary held sound like a drum. Guinevere remembered the smell first, damp grain and old wood, and then Lucian's voice carrying to every corner. "She fed route maps to rogues," he said, pacing before the assembled pack with performative sorrow. "The last raid struck our east stores because she gave timing and access. I ignored warning signs because I thought loyalty could be rebuilt." Guinevere stood between 2 sentries, wrists bound in ceremonial cord so no one would call it a restraint. Her stomach had just begun to show beneath her cloak then, a soft curve impossible to hide. She kept her chin level anyway. "That is a lie," she said. "Check the seal records. The raids began after I broke bond with you." Lucian smiled, pitying and precise. "You broke nothing. You wandered. You concealed a pregnancy of uncertain bloodline. You endangered us all." An elder with scarred cheeks avoided her eyes. "Do you deny sharing quarters with rogues at the Border Inn?" "I slept in the common room with 6 traitors and a child who cried all night." "Ask the innkeeper." "Unavailable." Lucian said smoothly. He left territory. Because someone paid him to disappear. The realization hit so hard she nearly swayed. Voices rose from the benches. Traitor! Exile her! Strip her name! One she-wolf she had trained with as a girl spat near her boots. You should have been grateful he chose you. Lucian stepped close enough that only she heard his next words. You always confuse kindness with weakness, Gwen. Sign restoration papers and return to my house. I can call this a misunderstanding. She stared at him. Memory overlapped memory, his hand closing over her jaw when she argued. Apologies delivered with gifts, rules tightening one by one until she needed permission to visit her own aunt. The night she ended the bond, he had said no mail would shelter damaged goods, and meant it as prophecy, not insult. I would rather sleep in winter mud, she whispered. His expression cooled. Then you will. He lifted his hand. The elder announced sentence before moonrise, exile without escort, no claim to den, ration, or guard passage, her trunk to be seized for restitution, her mother's effects reassigned by council discretion. That line pierced deeper than the rest. Not the hunger, not the danger, not even the public shame. Her mother's dress, folded in cedar and lavender, carried away by hands that had never seen the woman who stitched it. When they untied her wrists outside the granary, rain had started, thin and icy. A stable boy she barely knew lingered in the shadows and shoved a wrapped bundle into her arms. Don't say my name, he muttered. There's dried meat. 2 apples. Southgate changes watch at second bell. Why help me? He swallowed. Because my sister left with bruises and nobody called it law then. She nearly reached for his hand, stopped herself, and nodded once. Thank you. At second bell she kept to the wall behind the tannery, boots sliding in mud, cloak soaked through. Sentinels laughed under the gate arch, arguing over dice, while she moved between wagon shadows and slipped beyond the perimeter markers into Pine Dark. Behind her, starfall bells rang the hour. Ahead, only the mountain road and the distant rumor of Ravencrest rebuilding after fire. By dawn she had lost feeling in 2 fingers and vomited by the roadside from hunger and stress. By the second day, blisters split at both heels. Twice she heard wolves tracking parallel through trees and froze under fallen brush until the sounds passed. She talked to the child when fear surged, because speaking out loud kept panic from swallowing reason. We are not going back, she said into the wind. Not for bread, not for apologies, not for anything. When Ravencrest's towers finally appeared through mist, she did not feel relief. Relief required safety, and safety was still a negotiation. She felt only the raw, stubborn fact of one more step possible, then another, until the gate loomed and she asked strangers for mercy she could not afford to trust. The gate loomed and she asked strangers for mercy she could not afford to trust. The sentry on duty looked young enough that his beard came in uneven at the jaw, yet his stance carried the rigid discipline of a pack that had buried too many wolves to tolerate uncertainty. His gaze dropped to the swell beneath her wet cloak, then lifted to her face again. Name: Guinevere Thornwood. Former territory: Starfall. The air around the braziers seemed to tighten. 2 more guards shifted closer without being told. Rain ran from her hair down the back of her neck, cold and relentless, and every muscle in her body trembled from the effort of staying upright. She kept her hands visible. I am not armed, she said. I came alone. I am asking for temporary sanctuary and work. Anything you need done. The sentry's mouth flattened. Starfall sent riders to us last month claiming a female trader might flee this direction carrying stolen root logs. Of course Lucian had done that. Set the snare ahead of her and named it warning. I stole nothing, she said. Search me, search my pack, search my boots. I left with food wrapped in a rag and nothing else. One of the older guards stepped in, scar slashing pale through his brow. He took in her mud-caked hem, the raw skin at her wrists where ceremonial cord had rubbed, the way she braced one palm under her belly when the child shifted hard. His voice came out rougher, less suspicious. Open the side gate. If she wanted to sabotage us, she picked a poor hour and poorer shoes. They brought her through a narrow passage instead of the main arch, iron bars clanging shut behind them. Inside, Ravencrest smelled of fresh timber, wet stone, and smoke from too many torches burning at once. Workers crossed courtyards carrying tables, candle stands, casks of oil. Wolves in dress leathers hurried past with armfuls of winter greenery and silver thread banners. No one hid there staring. Some looked wary, some openly contemptuous, and a few looked almost guilty, as if they had known women in her posture before, and failed them too. By the time they reached the intake chamber, her vision had begun to blur at the edges. A healer pressed fingers to her pulse, then to her throat, then frowned at the bruise yellowing near her collar where Lucian had once gripped too hard and later called an accident. Malnourished, the healer muttered to a clerk. Exhaustion. Stress contractions if she keeps standing this long. The clerk did not meet Guinevere's eyes as she scratched notes onto a waxed board. Put her on provisional status, servant assignment until council review. A woman in house colors took over then, brisk and unsmiling. Marta. The same one who would later hand her the gray dress like a judgment already settled. Move, Marta said. The stronghold is at capacity for treaty night. You get a pallet in the lower hall and a work shift now. We do not feed idlers. Guinevere should have felt insult. Instead, she felt a dangerous, dizzy relief. A pallet. Walls. A door she could put behind her for a few hours. She swallowed and nodded. As they crossed an interior balcony, voices rose from the training court below. She looked despite herself. A circle of wolves had formed around two fighters, their movements fast even in gathering dark steel striking steel in measured bursts. At the edge of the ring stood a male in black and fur, bare forearms inked with old runes, posture still while everyone else moved around him. He didn't speak loudly, yet each correction he gave cut through wind and noise with surgical precision. Your left shoulder telegraphs. Again. The fighter reset instantly. No argument, no delay. Marta noticed where Guinevere was looking. Do not drift. That is alpha business. Guinevere tore her gaze away. She had seen dominant males before, males who built fear into ritual and called it order. This felt different in a way she did not trust yet. Less theatrical, more absolute. The kind of control that did not need to announce itself. The kind that might protect. The kind that might crush. Inside the preparation wing, the noise sharpened into ceremonial chaos. Wax dripped. Laces snapped. A servant cried over a dropped tray and was shoved aside. Someone pressed Servant Grey into Guinevere's arms, coarse wool scratching her wrists. Change, then torchline, Marta said. Keep your eyes down. Guinevere changed behind a screen, fingers numb, then stepped into the corridor and froze when she saw the ivory gown hanging under lamplight. Moon-thread vines along the sleeves, thornwood knotwork near the hem, her mother's hand in every stitch. Her breath caught hard enough to hurt. Celine Voss emerged in embroidered underlayers while two maids adjusted her hair. Ah, she said, glancing at Guinevere's face and instantly understanding. You recognize it. Take it off. Celine laughed softly. You arrived muddy and uninvited. This dress belongs where it will be seen. It belongs to me. It belongs to the future, Celine said, and turned her shoulder so the maid could begin lacing her into stolen silk. For one raw, blinding second, Guinevere imagined crossing the room, tearing the bodice seam with both hands, reducing the whole thing to ribbons and watching Celine scream. The thought shocked her with its force. So did the answering kick from her child, sharp as a warning. Do not lose control. Not here. Not where they are waiting to call you unstable. Inside her own mind, words came in a rush, present and merciless. I am shaking and they can see it. I am so tired I could lie down on this stone and sleep through whatever punishment follows. I am not weak for wanting one thing that is mine. I am not weak for wanting my mother back, for wanting a room where no one bargains over my body, for wanting this child born where no one spits at her for my choices. Breathe, count, hold the line. Let them take cloth if they must. They do not take my name. They do not take the part of me that kept walking when each mile felt like broken glass. I am still here. I am still here. Marta's hand clamped her elbow, not cruelly, but with no room for refusal. Hall, now. The great doors opened on heat, incense, and 1,000 watching eyes. Guinevere took her assigned place along the left aisle and lifted the torch until her shoulders burned. The iron shaft was heavier than it looked. Flame guttered, recovered, threw moving shadows across carved stone wolves at the wall base. Nobles whispered behind jeweled cuffs. Elders arranged themselves beneath the moon crest with faces practiced into neutrality. At the altar, Selene waited in ivory that should have been memory, not performance. Drums rolled once. Silence followed. Victor Ravencrest entered from the north arch, and the room's attention bent toward him as if tugged by tide. Up close, he was more striking than the glimpse from the courtyard had prepared her for, not because he was handsome in the polished way songs preferred, but because there was no split between what he was and what he projected. Power sat on him like weather, quiet, inevitable, dangerous when provoked. He walked the aisle toward the altar. Halfway there he faltered, so slight most wolves would have missed it. His head turned, slowly, unerringly, toward her. The first hit of the bond was warmth, brutal and immediate, flooding her spine and spreading through her chest until each breath felt too narrow to contain it. Then came a crackling rush beneath her skin, a live static racing down both arms to her fingertips. The torch shook. She tightened her grip until her knuckles blanched. A magnetic pull formed low in her body, not gentle, not negotiable, as if some buried compass had finally found north and refused every other direction. Victor drew a sharp breath that echoed in the hush. Amber bled into his irises, brightening toward molten gold. The runes on his forearms kindled one by one, lines of light branching across muscle like dawn splitting dark water. Several elders half rose in alarm. Selene whispered something from the altar, unheard. Guinevere could not look away. Fear slammed into longing so violently it made her dizzy. Lucian's face flickered through memory, his hand on her jaw, his voice saying no one else would ever choose her. Every old warning returned at once. Power always asks for surrender. Devotion becomes debt. Safety is temporary and conditional. Yet the bond's response cut across all of it with fierce, disorienting certainty. This male, this scent of cedar smoke and winter rain and iron, reached some locked chamber in her and opened it. Her instincts sharpened until she could hear individual heartbeats in the first 3 rows. The child moved in a hard rolling press, then settled, as if listening. The animal part of her went rigid, alert and awake after months of silence, not in panic, but recognition that bordered on grief. No, not now. Not where they can witness me breaking. Run, one part of her demanded. Survive first. Understand later. Stay, answered something older. Stay, and be seen. Victor stepped past the altar. A wave of sound tore through the hall, outrage and disbelief colliding. Selene's composure shattered. Marta made a strangled noise beside the wall. Guinevere barely heard any of it. Her whole world narrowed to the distance between them, each measured stride he took, the impossible tenderness and hunger locked down behind his controlled expression. He stopped in front of her, close enough that shared breath warmed the cold damp still clinging to her skin. His gaze dropped once, taking in the soot on her hands, the rough gray wool, the curve of her belly beneath tied apron strings, then lifted back to her face with a rawness he did not bother to hide. When he spoke, his voice was low, roughened by restraint and something like awe. "Guinevere." The torch trembled between her hands, and the whole hall seemed to wait for her to drop it. Faint, kneel, or run. Guinevere did none of those things. She held Victor's gaze and forced air into her lungs one measured breath at a time. Behind him, an elder rose so abruptly his chair scraped stone. "Alpha Ravencrest, return to the altar. The rite has witnesses." Victor did not turn. "Then let them witness clearly." His voice carried without strain, iron under velvet. "No claim will be made tonight under false presentation." Selena's composure cracked into open fury. "False? I stand where your counsel placed me." "Wearing what was stolen," Guinevere said, the words out before fear could leash them. Marta hissed her name like a warning, but Victor lifted one hand and the hall fell still again. He looked back at Guinevere, not at her dress, not at her belly first, but at her face as if asking a question no one else could hear. "May I take that torch?" The restraint of it jolted her harder than any command would have. Males like Lucian touched first and renamed it right after. This one asked over a simple iron handle while 200 wolves watched. She gave a tiny nod. Victor closed his hand around the shaft above hers, careful not to brush skin unless she allowed it, then passed the torch to a guard at his shoulder. "Come with me," he said, "not take, not order." "Come." Guinevere swallowed. "Where?" "Somewhere warm, somewhere without an audience." An elder snapped, "You cannot leave in the middle of treaty procedure." Victor finally turned his head, and the gold light in his runes made several wolves look down. "I just did." He offered his forearm, formal and public, a gesture that preserved her dignity instead of displaying possession. Guinevere hesitated for 2 pounding heartbeats, then set her fingers lightly against his sleeve. He led her down the side aisle, past the altar where Selene stood rigid in stolen ivory, past rows of faces sharpened by scandal and hunger for hierarchy. No one blocked them. Even outrage stepped aside for that kind of authority. In the antechamber beyond the great hall, the door shut on the roar of voices. Silence rushed in, broken only by the hiss of brazier coals and Guinevere's uneven breathing. Victor moved 2 paces away and stopped, giving her space. "I will not touch you without permission," he said. "Not because of politics, because I do not build bonds by force." Her laugh came out thin. "You say that now. I say it because I buried a sister who was traded as treaty leverage." The words were blunt, unadorned, and older than his face. "I was not strong enough then to stop it. I am strong enough now." The confession stripped something bare between them. Not softness exactly, but truth, without performance. Guinevere stared at him, thrown off balance by grief offered as context rather than weapon. A knock sounded. Marta entered carrying a folded blanket and a wooden cup, eyes fixed on the floor. "From the kitchen." Victor took both, dismissed her with a nod, and waited until the door latched again before stepping closer. "You are shaking. May I?" She nodded once. He settled the blanket around her shoulders, tucking it in with efficient hands that never lingered where they were not invited. The cup held water laced with mint. She drank greedily, then flushed with embarrassment. But Victor only looked away toward the brazier, granting privacy in plain sight. When she lowered the cup, she whispered, "You should go back. Your counsel will tear the hall apart." "Let them." He met her eyes again. "Tonight was meant to secure borders. Instead, it exposed an attempted fraud inside my walls. That matters more." "And me?" The question escaped before she could bury it. His expression changed by a fraction, enough for her to see the strain of control under his calm. You matter, because you are you. The bond recognized you in servant wool and ash. If I wanted convenience, I would have stayed at the altar. The child rolled low and hard, and pain knifed through her back. Guinevere braced one hand on the chair near her knees. Victor shifted instantly, then stopped himself, waiting. Do you want the healer? He asked. No healer. Not unless it gets worse. She swallowed another breath. I need to stand on my own legs. Then I stand near. Not over. The phrasing lodged under her ribs and stayed there. By first light, a bitter wind had swept through the upper terraces, driving frost into the cracks of new stone. Guinevere insisted on reporting for work anyway, partly from pride, partly because idleness felt too much like waiting to be judged. Marta assigned her to dawn inspection routes with 2 supply stewards counting storm damage along the outer stores. The climb to the grain tier looked manageable from below. Halfway up, the world narrowed to white breath and sharp pain in her hips. She made it to the top on stubbornness and nothing else. The wind bit through servant gray and sliced wetly behind her eyes. When the stewards moved ahead to check shutter hinges, she bent over the parapet and fought nausea with clenched teeth. Guinevere. Victor's voice came from behind her, closer than expected. She straightened too fast, swayed, and would have gone to her knees if his hand had not caught her elbow. He released at once when she found her balance. I am fine, she lied. He studied her face, the cracked skin at the corners of her lips, the tremor she could not hide anymore. You are running on 2 apples and defiance. Defiance has carried me this far. It has. Keep it. He shrugged off his fur cloak and settled it around her shoulders before she could protest, heavy warmth dropping over her like a second body. Now add fuel. A guard approached with a covered pot and 2 cups, eyes deliberately averted. Victor took the pot, sent the guard away, and crouched by the lee wall, where the wind was weakest. He set his palms around the metal. Gold lines along his forearms brightened, and within moments steam curled from the lid. Guinevere stared. You're heating it yourself. I can. He opened the pot, poured broth into a cup, then held it out. Slowly. It is richer than your stomach expects. She drank. Salt, marrow, thyme. Heat spread down her throat, into her chest, into the shaking places she had tried to pretend were not breaking. Victor did not watch her like a warden checking compliance. He faced the wall and gave her time, speaking only when she lowered the cup for breath. There is no debt attached to soup, he said, dry enough that a startled sound escaped her, almost a laugh. The corner of his mouth shifted. Good. Keep that sound. She finished half, then the rest. The child settled. Her pulse eased. Victor waited a beat, then asked quietly, May I greet the little one? Guinevere's fingers tightened around the empty cup. Fear rose, old and reflexive. Every previous touch had come with claim, suspicion, interrogation. Yet he was still kneeling, still asking. Yes, she whispered. He placed one broad hand over the curve of her belly, light and reverent, more blessing than hold. He bowed his head and spoke in a language she had heard only twice before from very old wolves at midwinter rites, consonants deep as drums, vowels like wind through pine. She did not know each word, but she knew the cadence: shelter, strength, clear road, safe birth, no shadow crossing the threshold. A knot she had carried for months loosened so suddenly it hurt. Tears came before she could stop them. Inside, her thoughts tumbled in the raw present tense she used when panic usually took over. Except this was not panic. I do not know what to do with gentleness that asks first. I do not know where to put this grief when it is touched, like it is holy instead of inconvenient. If I lean, I might fall. If I trust, I might lose everything again. But he is kneeling in frost, speaking to my child like she already belongs to a future. No bargain. No witness demanded. Just a promise offered into cold air. I am so tired of bracing for harm that mercy feels like vertigo. Breathe. Stay here. Let this moment be true even if tomorrow changes. When he looked up and saw her crying, he did not apologize for causing it. He simply handed her a clean cloth from his belt and waited until she dabbed her face, dignity intact. That night, after council aides argued until the corridor lamps burned low, Guinevere finally slept in a narrow guest room near the old archive stairs. She woke with a strangled gasp, Lucian's grip phantom tight around her wrist in the dream, his voice at her ear. Sign and return, sign and return. Her hand groped for light and hit metal. A short blade lay on the bedside table, newly sharpened, balanced beside a cup of water. She was on her feet before she fully woke, knife in hand, when she noticed the shadow beyond the half-open door. Victor sat on the stone just outside, back against the opposite wall, head tipped slightly forward in exhausted sleep, one arm folded over his chest, boots still on. He had not taken the room. He had taken the floor. By late afternoon, the summons came. Full council tribunal in the lower chamber, attendance mandatory, status of the Starfall exile to be determined before winter accords were signed. Guinevere walked beside Marta through corridors lined with carved wolves and listening servants. At the chamber doors, Victor was waiting in plain dark clothes, no ceremonial fur, runes banked but visible. Inside, 12 elders formed a crescent around the central dais. Scribes sat below them with wax tablets. Representatives from 2 neighboring packs watched from the side benches, faces carefully neutral. Elder Corvin began without greeting. Given present instability, the female Guinevere Thornwood should be confined to protected quarters until birth. Her condition and disputed history create unacceptable leverage points. Another elder added, "Rumors already spread that her child carries a fractured line. Containment is prudent." Containment. A gentle word for a locked door. Guinevere opened her mouth, but Victor lifted 2 fingers slightly. Wait. He let them finish. He let every argument land, every polished phrase that dressed fear as governance. Only when silence settled did he step forward. No. One word. Flat as a blade laid on stone. Corvin stiffened. Alpha, this is procedure. This is cowardice wrapped in procedure. Victor's canines lengthened just enough to show when he spoke again, not a snarl, a warning made visible. By challenge law, I stake my rank on her right to stand unconfined in Ravencrest unless she commits an offense under our code. She is not. Murmurs broke out along the benches. One council warrior, broad-shouldered and red-faced, moved from the side wall toward Guinevere. For safety, we should at least... His hand reached for her arm. Victor crossed the space in a blur of motion and caught the warrior's wrist mid-grab, grip precise and final. "Anyone touching my mate without consent answers to me before moonrise," he said, voice quiet enough to chill the room. The warrior blanched, nodded once, and stepped back when released. Victor turned his head toward Guinevere. "Your floor." Not speak for her. Give her the floor. She stepped into the center circle, heart hammering, and pulled 3 folded sheets from the satchel at her hip. Ravencrest quartermaster logs, trade dock tallies from East Sill, and convoy manifests recorded by neutral carriers, she said. I requested copies at dawn. Dates are marked. The raid Starfall blamed on me match nights when their own internal seals were already compromised, and 2 attacks occurred while I was documented in open market under witness stamp. The forged root marks mimic my handwriting poorly, but they repeat one error Lucian's clerk makes in every requisition line. She laid each sheet before the scribes, then lifted her chin toward the elders. I was accused because accusation was useful. If you confine me now for being politically inconvenient, You prove him right about what your law protects. No one spoke for 3 long breaths. Quills scratched as scribes checked dates against tablets. One visiting alpha leaned forward, eyes narrowing as he compared seal impressions. Elder Corvin exhaled slowly. These records will be verified. Do it, Guinevere said. Her voice shook once and steadied. I am done being tried by rumor. When she stepped back, Victor moved to stand 1 pace behind her shoulder, exactly where she could feel him without being crowded. Shield. Witness. Not cage. The tribunal adjourned at dusk pending verification. In the corridor outside, the noise of the stronghold resumed around them. Boots on stone, distant orders, clatter from kitchens preparing evening meal. Guinevere paused beneath a narrow window where cold light pooled on the floor. I expected you to speak over me, she said. I expected you to burn that room down with documents, he replied, and for the first time she saw clear humor in him, brief and warm. A small, unwilling smile touched her mouth and stayed. She looked at his hand resting open at his side, then set her fingers against his palm by choice, just for a moment, before walking on beside him. They had taken only 6 steps down the corridor when a runner nearly collided with Marta at the turn, chest heaving, hair damp with sweat despite the cold. He dropped to one knee in front of Victor and held up a sealed tube marked with black wax and a silver star scored through by a knife slash. Border post at Grey Ridge, he said. This came under truce cloth. The rider refused to enter. Victor took the tube. Guinevere did not need to see the signet pressed into wax to know whose hand had sent it. Her stomach tightened anyway, a hard, involuntary pull that made her set one hand below her ribs. Victor noticed, tucked the tube into his belt without opening it in the hall, and said to Marta, Get Corvin, the quartermaster, and Captain Nessa to the map room. Now. The map room smelled of ink, leather, and old stone warmed by a single brazier. Once the door shut, Victor broke the seal and unrolled a narrow strip of parchment. His gaze moved once across the lines, then he handed it to Guinevere without comment. Lucian's handwriting was elegant in the way knives were elegant. To Alpha Ravencrest and attending packs. In the spirit of regional stability, Starfall offers immediate withdrawal of patrol pressure and cessation of claims regarding trade theft, contingent upon lawful return of Guinevere Thornwood under standing mate right. She departed under unresolved bond contract and carries disputed lineage that may transmit blood fracture. Return her by next moonrise, and I will deliver names of those forging your seals. Refuse, and every loss from this point forward sits at your gate. At the bottom, in smaller ink meant only for her, was a line no stranger should have known. Sign this time, and I will stop entering your dreams. Guinevere passed the parchment back with fingers gone cold. He wants me as treaty currency in front of witnesses so he can call it law. Corvin swore under his breath. Nessa leaned over the map table, jaw set. He also claims knowledge of forged Ravencrest seals. Either he created them, or he bought whoever did. He created them, Guinevere said. He never threatens with a knife he does not already hold. Victor's expression did not shift, but the runes at his forearms brightened in thin gold threads. Then we treat this as active warcraft. Corvin, lock seal stock and reissue trademarks by hand count. Nessa, rotate night patrols off predictable loops and double watchers at grain tiers. Corvin hesitated, glancing at Guinevere. If he invokes old mate statutes publicly, some neighboring alphas may support arbitration. They will call this a domestic claim, not a border threat. Victor's voice went quieter, which made the room listen harder. Anyone who calls coercion domestic can test that argument in my circle. The orders went out within the hour. By the time corridor lamps were lit for evening meal, whispers had outrun messengers. Servants paused when Guinevere passed. A visiting envoy from Ashford watched her with frank unease, then looked away when she met his eyes. Near the kitchens, 2 young warriors fell silent mid-sentence as she approached, and she still caught the words blood fracture before they swallowed them. Rumor moved faster than fire because rumor needed no tinder, only fear. She found Victor in the West Archive alcove after midnight, sleeves rolled, maps spread across a long table weighted with stones. Snowlight leaked through arrow slits and turned the parchment edges silver. He looked up as she entered, then pushed a cup of heated mint water toward her before she asked. "You should be sleeping," he said. "So should you." I delegated sleep to someone less stubborn. A brief, reluctant smile touched her mouth and faded. She came to his side and studied the map pins. Red markers at border roads, blue at storehouses, a black cluster near the neutral caravan route through Birch Pass. "Why that route?" she asked. "Because it is shared," he said. "Any attack there can be blamed outward in 3 directions." She traced a line with one finger, not touching the map where his hand rested. Heat rose between them anyway, a low charged pull that had nothing to do with the brazier. The bond sat under her skin like a second pulse, never quiet, sometimes gentle, sometimes sharp enough to steal breath. Tonight it felt like standing at the edge of deep water in darkness, hearing it call your name. Inside her, thought turned immediate and unguarded. I want to trust this, and I am frightened by how much I want it. I know how quickly tenderness can become leverage. I know what it costs to mistake hunger for safety. Yet this male asks, waits, listens, and each small mercy loosens another knot I tied to survive. If I lean into him, I might finally rest. If I lean and he falls, I drown with him. My child feels every surge of fear, every thin thread of hope. I cannot afford fantasy. I cannot afford cynicism either. I need truth that holds under pressure, not vows spoken in warm rooms. Victor was watching her face, reading what she did not say aloud. "Tell me where your mind went." She exhaled slowly. "To the part where men promise protection and then negotiate terms." He nodded once, accepting the wound without defensiveness. "Then hear mine clearly. I will fight beside you, not over you. I will not trade you to buy peace. If Ravencrest falls for that choice, it falls with its spine intact." Something in her chest eased, not fully, but enough. A knock interrupted them. Nessa entered with 2 tablets and a folded strip of coarse cloth. "Sabotage at lower stores," she said. "Rope bracing on the grain shutters was cut from the inside. We found this snagged on a nail." She laid the cloth on the table. House gray weave, Ravencrest issue. Corvin, arriving behind her, added, "2 displaced betas hired last week for labor are missing from roll call. False names, paid in Starfall coin." Guinevere touched the cloth, then the coin Nessa dropped beside it. The star was real. The mint line was wrong. "Not Starfall mint," she said. "Look at the ridge cut. Lucian has private dies. He used them for off-ledger payments when he wanted deniability." Nessa gave her a sharp nod of respect. "Can you testify to that before Allied Alphas?" "Yes." By the second night after Lucian's letter, the pressure had turned structural. A courier hawk from North Hollow arrived with a demand for clarification on cursed succession risk. Another pack postponed salt shipments until claims were investigated. 3 merchants asked to move their caravans under armed escort at Ravencrest expense. Corvin called it death by 100 administrative cuts. Victor called it siege without banners. At dusk, Guinevere stepped onto the inner balcony for air and found Selene Voss waiting by the balustrade in a cloak trimmed with white fox. The stolen dress was gone. The contempt remained. "You could end this," Selene said, without greeting. "1 signature, 1 return, and trade stabilizes." Guinevere stopped 3 paces away. "You sound rehearsed." "I sound practical. Pacts survive by choosing the least ruin." "Ruin for whom?" Celine's gaze dropped to Guinevere's belly and lifted again. for everyone if a blood-unstable child inherits power. The words were smooth, almost clinical, and that made them crueler. Guinevere took one step closer until Selena had to tilt her chin to keep the same height in the exchange. "Say that in tribunal under oath," Guinevere said. "Say who told you. Say what you were offered." Selena's composure flickered. Just once. "You think this is about me?" "No," Guinevere said. "I think you mistook proximity to power for safety." She left Selene at the railing, silent for the first time since she had entered Ravencrest. The strike came an hour later. A bell hammered from the east tower, not ceremonial cadence but alarm, 3 fast peals repeated. Then a second bell answered from the lower stores. Smoke rolled past the high windows in a dark sheet that smelled of lamp oil, not kitchen fire. The corridor erupted into running feet. "Grain tier is burning! Bucket lines to the cistern! Where is the Alpha?" Guinevere reached the main stair just as Victor came up from the war passage in partial shift, pupils narrowed, nails lengthened into black-tipped claws for traction on wet stone. He caught her wrist lightly as she moved to pass. "Command post," he said. "Now. Do not sideline me. Not sidelining, positioning." He released her and pointed to Nessa. "With me." Wind knifed across the east yard, feeding flame along tarred beams. Wolves formed chains from cistern to storehouse, throwing water that turned to steam in the heat. Above them, 2 figures in Ravencrest cloaks ran the catwalk and kicked burning pitch pots down into the grain vents. "Those are not ours," Nessa shouted. "Wrong gate!" One saboteur leaped to the adjoining roof, hood falling back. Guinevere knew the face from Starfall outposts, a beta who had once escorted Lucian's private ledgers. "Rhett," she said. "He handled off-book payments." Rhett looked straight at her across smoke and distance, smiled, and vanished over the ridgeside. A horn sounded from the outer gate, long and urgent. A scout slid into the yard, horse lathered, voice shredded by speed. Neutral caravan hit at Birch Pass. Survivors claim attackers wore Ravencrest colors and shouted Ravencrest challenge marks. 2 drivers dead, 3 wagons taken, and witnesses are already riding to neighboring packs. Corvin's face went ashen. "That is coalition trigger." Victor turned to Guinevere, and in that look, she saw the whole equation lock into place. Fire to cripple winter stores, false flag raid to isolate them politically, rumor to poison sympathy before facts could catch up. Then the gate captain shouted from above, "Truce party at the south approach. Starfall standard. Lucian Starfall requesting immediate entry under witness law." Of course he had timed it to the minute, arriving while smoke still climbed their walls. Nessa spat onto the stone. "He wants to stand in our burning yard and offer rescue." Guinevere felt fear rise, then harden into something colder and far more useful. "Do not let him frame the room," she said. "Call emergency conclave now, Moon Deus. Full witness, no closed doors. If he speaks under Oathstone." Victor held her gaze for one beat, then nodded. "Done." Another shout cut through the yard, higher, panicked. "North Grain Tower, the support braces are going." The upper platform groaned, timber splitting with a sound like thunder, and a sheet of burning thatch peeled away toward the crowded bucket line below. Guinevere was already moving before anyone could stop her, sprinting into smoke as the tower began to fall. Guinevere hit the bucket line shoulder first and shoved 2 workers backward just as the burning thatch came down. Sparks burst across stone in a bright, violent sheet. Heat punched the breath from her chest. Someone screamed her name, maybe Marta, maybe Nessa. And then Victor was there on her left, one arm sweeping a drenched canvas over the nearest flames, while his other hand caught a falling beam and heaved it away from the line. "Back to the cistern lane," he barked. "Now! Move!" The workers scattered into ordered motion, years of drill overriding panic. Guinevere coughed through smoke, eyes stinging, and saw the upper brace still hanging by a single iron pin, groaning over the yard where 6 wolves were passing waterskins. If it dropped, the whole row would be crushed against the wall. She ran toward the winch post. A guard grabbed for her sleeve. "Do not go under that." "It is tied into the counterweight," she snapped. "If it falls free, it takes the beam with it." The rope was already smoldering through. She caught the crank with both hands, boots slipping on wet stone, and hauled until her shoulders burned. The mechanism shuddered but held. Behind her, Victor shouted orders over the roar. "Nessa, clear the lower steps. Corvin, seal the grain doors. Anyone not assigned to fire lines, out of this yard." Then the south gate horns blew again, long and ceremonial, absurdly polished against the crackle of burning timber. Lucian Starfall rode through smoke under truce cloth with 6 wolves in dark cloaks and polished mail, as if he were arriving for a feast instead of a siege. He swung down from the saddle without haste, silver clasp bright at his throat, hair tied back in formal court style. Even at a distance, Guinevere could see the familiar precision in his posture, the way he arranged his face into concern for witnesses while calculating where fear was ripest. He raised his voice toward the yard. "Alpha Ravencrest, I came to prevent regional collapse. Stand down your panic and hear lawful terms." Victor stepped forward, soot streaking his jaw, runes lit in sharp gold lines. "You enter during active sabotage and call it diplomacy. Choose your next sentence carefully." Lucian's gaze slid past him and fixed on Guinevere at the winch. "There she is, the source of all this waste." Rage moved through her like a clean blade. She kept cranking until the brace settled into a notch, and the overhead groan eased from thunder to strain. Only then did she straighten. "You lit my refuge on fire," she said. "Do not say waste like this is weather." Lucian gave a small, almost tender smile that made her skin crawl. "I lit nothing. Your new pack cannot even protect grain, much less truth. Return with me under mate right arbitration, and I will testify that Ravencrest is merely incompetent, not treasonous." Around them, wolves froze with buckets half raised. This was the trap. Force the argument into personal law while evidence still burned. Victor answered first. "There is no valid mate right over coercion." "There is, if she signed bond restoration under Moon Witness," Lucian said smoothly. "Which she did. In Year 1, Clause 7. Permanent claim, pending issue." Guinevere went cold. Clause 7. The page Lucian had hidden beneath ceremony text while she was 19 and grieving, the page he had covered with his hand and said, was routine lineage language. She remembered the pressure of his fingers guiding hers to sign. He watched her face and knew she remembered too. His eyes sharpened with satisfaction. "Do you see?" He called to the yard and the growing crowd at the arches. "She always mistakes structure for malice." Victor took one step, and power rolled off him hard enough that 2 of Lucian's escorts shifted their stance. "Emergency conclave," he said without looking away. "Moon dais, full witness, oathstone open. Lucian speaks there or not at all." Lucian inclined his head, as if granting a favor. "Gladly. Let everyone hear." Less than 20 minutes later, bells drove every available witness into the Moon Hall. Smoke still threaded the rafters, and wet footprints marked the aisles. The altar candles had been relit in haste. Elders from neighboring packs crowded the front tiers with guards braced behind them, while scribes lined both walls, quills poised above fresh tablets. Guinevere stood at the edge of the dais and felt the child shift. Not frantic now, just present. A steady weight that reminded her exactly what was at stake. Lucian took position opposite her, immaculate despite the ash in the air. Victor remained 1 pace behind her right shoulder, silent as promised, fury banked but visible in every line of him. Elder Corvin struck the staff once. "By witness law, speak claims. Falsehood under stone binds the liar." Lucian spread his hands. My claim is simple. Guinevere Thornwood fled active bond while carrying disputed bloodline. Since her arrival, Ravencrest stores burn, caravans are attacked in Ravencrest colors, and neighboring trade fails. Return her to Starfall for lawful adjudication, and I withdraw military pressure immediately. Murmurs rippled. A visiting alpha from Ashford called, "What proof ties her to your claws?" Lucian produced a folded document with deliberate care. Signed restoration. Guinevere did not reach for it. Read Clause 7 aloud. He smiled. No need for theatrics. Read it. Corvin held out his hand. Document to Deus. Lucian passed it over. Corvin scanned, brow tightening. Clause 7 grants custodial claim over mate and issue in perpetuity during alleged instability. A hiss went through the room. Guinevere lifted her voice. He called that lineage protection when I was 19. He hid it between pages and covered the text while I signed. Lucian's expression chilled. Convenient memory. Also unprovable. He turned to the benches and struck where he thought she was weakest. He began reciting private details from her nights at Ravencrest, fragments no outsider should know. The archive alcove, the blade by her bedside, the old wolf blessing Victor spoke at dawn. Gasps broke from the side tiers. Nessa swore under her breath. Even Corvin looked shaken. There are ears in this stronghold that prefer stability, Lucian said. Ask yourselves what else she tells in confidence when frightened. The room tipped toward panic exactly as he intended. Guinevere felt it happen in scent and sound, fear turning metallic, bodies leaning away from her like she carried plague. Her pulse climbed. For one hard second she wanted to retreat into silence because silence was familiar and safer than exposure. Then she saw Victor's hand at his side, open, still, waiting for her choice. She stepped onto the center stone. I invoke maternal memory right, she said. Corvin recoiled. That right is rare and taxing. In your condition. In my condition, she cut in. I am done being spoken around. She drew Nessa's utility blade from the nearest belt before anyone could object, sliced her palm, and pressed blood to the oath stone. The stone drank the red and flared silver-white, lines racing outward in concentric rings. Pain lanced up her arm, bright and dizzying. She kept her hand down. By blood carried and blood remembered, she said through clenched teeth. I call witness sight. Power answered. It came not as fire, but as layered sensation flooding the hall. Lucian's voice in a shuttered room promising coin to 2 displaced betas, his hand stamping counterfeit Ravencrest seals from private dies, Celine receiving the stolen dress and instructions for the altar deception, masked wolves taking Ravencrest cloaks before striking the neutral caravan, Lucian coaching a clerk to alter dates. Lucian dictating the letter while watching smoke rise from a map-marked grain tier. The visions were not images alone. They carried smell, sound, pulse. Every wolf in the hall felt the oil on the torch rags, heard the clink of Starfall coin, tasted Lucian's contempt when he said, "She bends if cornered." Lucian lunged for the stone with a snarl, silver sigils flashing across his wrist bracers, control glyphs meant to interrupt oath work. Guinevere's body moved on instinct older than fear. White silver claws burst from her right hand in partial shift, and she slammed her palm down. The shockwave cracked across the dais and shattered his sigils into bright fragments. Silence detonated into shouting. Corvin shouted for order. Guards surged forward. Lucian staggered back, face stripped of polish, and bared his teeth. Guinevere pointed at him, claws still gleaming. I call formal challenge under witness law. No proxies, no counsel delay. Here. Now. Lucian's lip curled. You cannot even hold full shift. Try me. Witness law bound him the moment he answered with a step into the challenge ring. The elders had no legal room to refuse. They moved to the torchlit stone circle in the inner court, wind ripping smoke into ragged banners overhead. Wolves packed every tier and parapet. Nessa stood with the adjudicators. Corvin held the law staff. Victor took the perimeter line, half shifted now, claws out, every muscle tight with the effort of not intervening unless rules broke. Corvin's voice rang. Challenge is for truth and authority. Fight until surrender or incapacity. Lucian attacked on the opening breath, fast and dirty, feinting high, then cutting low toward her center line. Guinevere pivoted, pain skidding along her hip, and caught his forearm with her shifted hand. Silver oath light snapped from her wrist to his like a chain finding its lock. He jerked, shocked. What did you do? Learned. He struck with his free hand. She took the hit across the shoulder, staggered, and tasted copper. He pressed in, trying to drive her backward toward the ringstones where footing was slick. Victor growled from the boundary, a sound that vibrated in her spine, but he held position. Lucian leaned close, breath harsh. You were mine before he found your scent. Guinevere tightened the oath chain until his arm buckled. I was never yours, only afraid. With her left hand she hooked 2 fingers under the ward plate at his chest, found the hidden seam she had once watched him adjust in mirrors, and tore the stolen alpha token free. Light burst from the gap. Lucian screamed, raw and startled, as counterfeit authority bled out of him in wavering gold threads. He dropped to one knee. Victor crossed the line then, lawful now that the token had marked fraud, and slammed Lucian flat with a single brutal sweep, forearm to throat, claws at the collarbone. Lucian thrashed, reached for a concealed blade at his boot, and made one last blind slash toward Guinevere's legs. She stepped inside the arc and struck his throat with the edge of her shifted hand. The motion was precise, final. Lucian convulsed once, then went still beneath Victor's hold. No one moved for 3 breaths. Wind snapped the banners. Torches hissed. Corvin lifted the staff. By witness law, Lucian Starfall is stripped of rank, claim, and right. Judgment carried. Guinevere stood over the body, chest heaving, claws retracting slowly as adrenaline ebbed. Her palm still bled from the oathstone cut, drops dark on the circle floor. She looked to the gathered packs and spoke so every tear heard. Let record show this. Coercion is not bond. Fraud is not law. Any pack that trades a female by force will answer before this circle the same way. One by one, neighboring alphas lowered their heads in formal acknowledgement. Nessa signaled the truth binders. 2 captured collaborators were brought forward from the holding arch, wrists shackled in silver cord. Under binding, they confessed to coin payments, cloak theft, and caravan orders within minutes, voices shaking as the oath tightened on each lie. At Victor's nod, Pyre Warden stepped in, carried Lucian's body to the sanction pit, and lit the immediate law fire. Flame rose clean and high, no ceremony beyond necessity. The political threat ended where everyone could see it end, in law, in witness, in ash that could not keep speaking. Only when the fire steadied did Guinevere realize Victor was in front of her, hands hovering near her arms without touching until she nodded. Then he took her bloodied hand carefully between both of his, pressed his forehead to hers, and breathed once, deep and shaking. Around them, Ravencrest began the hard work of survival again, counting stores, reassigning watches, recording confessions, sending riders with sealed testimony before rumor could outrun truth. In the center of the stone circle, Guinevere stayed on her feet, oath light fading from her skin, while the pack that had once called her burden watched her as authority made visible. Smoke still clung to her hair when Victor led her through the inner passage toward the Moon Temple baths, one hand hovering at her back in case the stone turned slick beneath her boots. No guards followed. Nessa stood at the arch and shut the carved cedar doors behind them, giving them privacy and a perimeter in the same motion. Inside, heat rose from spring-fed pools cut into black rock veined with quartz. Moonlight poured through the open oculus and turned the water to pale silver. Guinevere set Nessa's utility blade and the torn alpha token on the nearest altar shelf beside a clean cloth, because evidence mattered even now, and because she was no longer willing to let truth slip through unmarked hands. Victor stripped off his ruined coat and bracers, placing each piece in a neat stack far from the water. Blood darkened one sleeve where Lucian's last slash had clipped him. He noticed her looking and said, "Shallow," before she asked. Then he stepped no closer. "Do you choose this room with me?" he said, voice low and steady. "Or do you want a healer first and distance tonight?" The crux sat between them as clearly as the stone floor. Desire without consent was another form of theft, and they had both survived too much theft. Guinevere swallowed, tasting ash and mineral steam. "I choose this room. I choose you here." He nodded once, fierce relief flashing and then smoothing into control. They washed in silence at first, careful and practical, rinsing soot from skin, wringing smoke from hair, cleaning shallow cuts with salt water and clean linen. When he reached toward the scrape on her shoulder, he paused and waited. She turned slightly, granting access. His fingers were warm, precise, almost reverent. Inside her mind, thought arrived in the bright present tense that always came when the stakes were real. I am not performing this. I am not bargaining for shelter. I am standing in my own skin, bruised and shaking, and I am still the one deciding. If I say yes, it is yes. If I say wait, it is wait. This is what safety feels like. Not the absence of fear, but the presence of choice. The child is quiet now, listening, and I can feel the bond along my spine like a held note waiting for resolution. I want the mark. I want the vow in flesh. Not because a council requires it, but because I do. She stepped closer until their chests nearly touched. "Ask me again," she whispered, needing the words spoken clearly enough to anchor in bone. Victor cupped her jaw, thumb resting lightly below her cheekbone. "Do you choose me without fear?" "Yes." Her answer came clean, no tremor. "I choose you without fear." His eyes sharpened with something ancient and tender all at once. He bent, pressed his mouth to the place where neck met shoulder, and held there for one heartbeat, two, giving her one last chance to pull away. She did not. She tilted her throat to him in open invitation. His bite landed with controlled force, pain bright and precise, a flash that made her gasp and grip his shoulders. The sting peaked, then transformed, heat flooding outward in concentric waves through her chest, down her arms, into her belly where the child kicked once, and then settled against a sudden steady rhythm. Gold-white light raced beneath both their skin, tracing rune to pulse, pulse to pulse, until the whole bond snapped into full alignment. Victor shuddered against her, forehead to her temple, breath ragged. "Mine," he whispered, not as ownership, as oath. "Mine to protect, mine to honor." Guinevere touched the fresh mark, wincing at the tenderness, then reached for his wrist. "Yours," she said, meeting his gaze. "And you are mine." She bared new fangs and bit over his pulse exactly where his skin thinned above the artery, deliberate and mirrored. His whole body went taut under her hands. The answering surge hit harder than the first, two currents completing one circuit. She felt his grief for his dead pack, his stubborn hope for this rebuilt one, his awe when he had first seen her in Servant Grey, his terror in the circle when Lucian lunged. In return, she let him feel the granary verdict, the mountain road, the hunger, the moment his old wolf blessing had broken her open, and the fierce protective love she already carried for the life under her heart. "Mate," they said together, almost the same breath. The water around their calves trembled with the bond's resonance, and then went still. Silence settled, full rather than empty. Victor wrapped both arms around her and she let her weight rest against him, cheek to his throat, listening to the new matched cadence between his heartbeat, hers, and the smaller one between them. When they finally dressed in fresh linen, he took the torn alpha token from the shelf and sealed it in a waxed evidence pouch stamped with Ravencrest black. Guinevere tied the pouch herself. They carried it out together. 3 days later, the great hall smelled of beeswax, ink, and thawing pine resin as neighboring packs assembled for the repledging. No one stood at the altar in stolen silk this time. The ivory dress had been recovered from Celine's quarters at dawn after her sworn statement. By her own request, it had been returned to Guinevere folded in cedar, untouched since the seizure. Celine now stood before the council in plain wool, voice hoarse but clear, and admitted Lucian's payment, the staged altar roll, and the corridor contacts who fed him private details. Her sentence was 12 years of restitution service in the sanctuary network under oath binding, no rank privileges, no council vote. She accepted without protest. At the central table, Corvin cataloged every physical record allowed so no one could later claim omission. Lucian's truce letter from Grey Ridge, the counterfeit coin with flawed ridge cut, the house gray cloth from the sabotaged brace, the forged restoration document containing Clause 7, the torn alpha token removed in open challenge, and the confessions signed under truth binding by both displaced betas and Rhett, captured at dawn by Nessa's patrol 2 ridges north. The private mint dies were recovered from a cache he revealed to shorten his sentence. North Hollow's Hawk inquiry was answered with this full packet, Corvin said, raising a sealed copy. Receipt returned this morning. Their counsel accepts the findings and withdraws the blood fracture allegation. The Ashford envoy who had once watched Guinevere with unease rose and bowed to her directly. Our caravan survivors confirmed the false colors and identified Starfall command words under oath. Compensation routes are restored. Marta, standing with house staff along the wall, met Guinevere's eyes when the accords were signed and gave one small, unhidden nod. No apology speech, no performative tears. Just acknowledgement, finally honest. When the last seal cooled, Victor took the floor and then stepped aside, yielding the center to Guinevere before every witness. Corvin placed the Ravencrest circlet in her hands instead of on her head, and she set it on herself. By ratified accord, Corvin declared, staff striking stone once, Guinevere Thornwood Ravencrest is recognized as Luna Queen and co-ruler, with primary authority over justice review, orphan protection, and sanctuary law. The hall answered in one unified kneel. By first thaw, sanctuary wagons stood in Ravencrest's lower yard under a new carved sign that read, "No wolf returned by force." Celine sorted blankets beside Marta under supervision, silent and efficient. Nessa drilled mixed patrols from 3 packs on shared signals to prevent another false flag strike. Corvin grumbled over budget tablets and smiled when he thought no one saw. On a rain-bright evening months later, Labor took Guinevere in the same great hall where she had once carried a torch in servant gray. This time the doors were barred to gossip and opened only to those she named. Nessa kept the perimeter. Marta brought hot water and clean cloth with steady hands. Corvin waited outside with 2 healers and pretended to review tariffs while wearing a groove into the stone. When the child finally cried, sharp and furious and gloriously alive, Victor laughed once like a man surprised by joy, and gathered their daughter against his chest. He bowed his head and spoke the old blessing he had first offered at dawn over steaming broth and shaking hands, each word sure. Guinevere, exhausted and radiant, touched the mating mark at her shoulder, then the one at his wrist. The bond between them felt settled now, not a storm, but a strong river finding its channel. He leaned down, pressed his forehead to hers, and whispered, "Yours?" She smiled, eyes wet, and answered, "Mine, mate." Outside, Ravencrest bells rang not for alarm, but for home.